Deep within the rolling hills of modern-day Bulgaria, a farmer's plow strikes something hard, something that should not be there. What he uncovers is not just soil and stone, but the glint of gold, the silent gaze of a funerary mask, and the entrance to a tomb untouched for over 2,000 years. This is not a scene from a film. It is a real moment of discovery that has happened time and again, pulling back the curtain on one of history's most captivating yet overlooked civilizations, the Thracians. For centuries, these fierce and wealthy warriors dominated the Balkans, their culture a vibrant tapestry of war, art, and profound spiritual belief. Yet they were so thoroughly overshadowed by their neighbors, the Greeks and Romans, that they nearly vanished from history. Until now, their secrets were not written on scrolls or carved into monuments for all to see. They were buried, hidden away in the earth, waiting for us to find them. And it is within these sacred spaces of the dead that we discover who the Thracians truly were. Their burial customs are a window into a soul, a complex and often startling view of a people who saw death not as an end, but as a magnificent beginning. Imagine a society where a warrior's status was measured not just by the treasures he accumulated in life, but by the grandeur of his journey into the next world. The Thracians possessed a belief in the afterlife so powerful that it dictated every aspect of their funerary rites, creating practices that can seem bizarre, beautiful, and even unsettling to our modern eyes. They were a people who saw the world as deeply interconnected, where gods, nature, and humanity were woven together, and death was the ultimate transformation. This spiritual complexity is what we will explore together today. We are about to embark on a journey into the shadows of history to uncover 25 of the most unusual burial customs of the Thracians. From chieftains laid to rest in mounds of earth, their faces covered in solid gold masks, to evidence of ritual dismemberment that hints at beliefs we can only begin to decipher, each custom reveals a piece of their extraordinary worldview. This is more than a list of strange facts. It is an exploration of the human condition, of how different cultures have grappled with the great mystery of what comes after our final breath. The Thracians offer us a perspective that is both alien and deeply human, a reminder that our own rituals are just one way of honoring the departed. As we walk through these 25 practices, you will see a civilization that celebrated life with such intensity that they prepared for death with unparalleled creativity and devotion. So prepare to have your curiosity ignited and your understanding of the ancient world transformed. We are going to step into their sacred burial mounds, examine their exquisite golden artifacts, and piece together the beliefs of a people who have long since passed into legend, but whose extraordinary farewells echo through the ages. Our journey into these unusual customs begins not within a tomb, but standing before one, a colossal, man-made mountain rising from the earth. The most defining feature of the Thracian funerary landscape was the tumulus, an immense earthen mound that served as the eternal home for kings, chieftains, and the warrior elite. To simply call it a burial mound doesn't capture its true significance. These were not hidden graves, they were bold, permanent statements of power, visible for miles across the plains and valleys. Imagine a landscape dotted with these artificial hills, each one a silent sentinel guarding the legacy of a mighty leader. The sheer scale of their construction speaks volumes about the society that built them. Creating a single large tumulus was a monumental undertaking that would have required the coordinated labor of an entire community for months, if not years. People would have moved countless tons of earth and stone, not under the whip of a tyrant, but likely as a collective act of devotion and respect for their chieftain. This was a public project that demonstrated the leader's importance in life and cemented their status in the afterlife. The prominent size was a deliberate choice, a constant reminder to the living of the authority that once ruled the land, ensuring that the memory of the deceased would never fade from view. But the true marvel of the tumulus lies hidden beneath the grassy surface. The external mountain of earth was merely a shell protecting an intricate internal structure. At the heart of the mound, master stonemasons would construct a burial chamber, often using massive, finely cut stone blocks to create a beehive-shaped vault or a simple rectangular room known as a dolmen. The precision of this stonework was extraordinary, designed to be structurally sound enough to withstand the immense pressure of the earth piled above it for centuries. This chamber was not just a container for a body, it was a sacred space, a final dwelling place meticulously prepared for the deceased's journey. It was built with one primary purpose: to protect the occupant and their priceless grave goods for all eternity, safe from the elements and perhaps more importantly from grave robbers. The Thracians went to incredible lengths to create a permanent, sealed environment, believing that the integrity of this tomb was directly linked to the well-being of the soul in the next world. From the air, the true extent of this practice becomes breathtakingly clear. In regions like the Valley of the Thracian Kings in Bulgaria, you can see vast fields of these mounds, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, creating a sprawling necropolis of the ancient elite. Each tumulus is a unique size and shape, telling a story of the individual buried within the larger the mound, the greater the power and wealth of the chieftain it honored. This visual legacy, still stamped upon the land after more than 2 millennia, offers us one of the most profound insights into Thracian culture. It shows a society deeply hierarchical, where status continued unabated into the afterlife, and a people so convinced of an existence beyond death that they invested a staggering amount of their collective resources into building these eternal homes. The tumulus was more than a grave. It was the first and most dramatic step in a chieftain's final, magnificent transformation. And if the tumulus was the grand stage for this final transformation, then the chieftain himself was the star adorned for eternity. Stepping inside one of these burial chambers, archaeologists have uncovered scenes of opulence that rival the legends of King Midas. This was no simple interment. It was a carefully orchestrated presentation of power meant to last forever. The central figure, the chieftain, would be laid to rest not just with a few sentimental items, but with a hoard of treasure that was a direct reflection of his status, a literal king's ransom intended to accompany him into the next world. The most iconic and personal of these treasures is the death mask. Imagine the scene. After carefully preparing the body, artisans would place a mask of pure, hammered gold or sometimes silver over the face of the deceased. The most famous example, discovered in the Goliamata Magilla Mound, is a masterpiece of quiet dignity. This isn't a generic, idealized face. It has a distinct, individual character with a strong nose, a closed mouth, and calm, heavy-lidded eyes. It was crafted with an astonishing level of realism, suggesting it was meant to be a true likeness, preserving not just the memory, but the very presence and authority of the leader. This mask served a profound spiritual purpose. By creating a perfect, imperishable likeness in a metal that never tarnishes, the Thracians believed they were protecting the essence of the person, ensuring their identity and power would remain intact for the journey ahead. It was a barrier against decay and oblivion, a golden shield for the soul, but the mask was only the beginning. The chieftain was surrounded by a symphony of wealth that spoke to every aspect of his life and role. His martial prowess was represented by exquisitely crafted weaponry. We find ceremonial rhytons, drinking vessels shaped like animal heads or horns, made from solid gold and silver, often intricately decorated with scenes of gods and heroes. These weren't just cups, they were symbols of his ability to host great feasts, to offer libations to the gods, and to lead his people in ritual. Then there are the horse trappings. The Thracians were renowned horsemen, and their wealth was measured in their herds. A chieftain would be buried with elaborate bridles, frontlets, and decorative plates for his horses, all made of bronze or precious metals. This was more than just showing off wealth. It signaled that even in the afterlife he would remain a mounted warrior, a leader of men, his status eternally affirmed by the noble animals that served him. Each object, from a simple silver file used for pouring offerings to a finely inlaid sword, was a cog in a machine designed to project an uninterrupted continuum of power from this world into the next. The sheer quality of these objects is a revelation in itself. For a civilization often relegated to the footnotes of Greek history, the technical skill displayed in these tombs is breathtaking. The metalwork shows an incredible sophistication in techniques like repoussé, where metal is shaped from the reverse side to create a design in low relief, as well as fine granulation and filigree work. This was not the work of provincial craftsmen copying Greek styles. It was a unique and highly developed artistic tradition. The presence of such masterpieces forces us to completely reconsider the Thracians. They were not mere barbarians on the fringe of the classical world. They were a sophisticated society with a complex social hierarchy, immense resources, and artists capable of producing works that stand among the finest of the ancient world. The tomb of a Thracian chieftain, therefore, is far more than a repository of treasure. It is a frozen moment in time, a deliberate and powerful statement that death was not a demotion, but a promotion to an even higher eternal rank. Every piece of gold, every finely wrought weapon, shouts a single, unwavering belief: what you are here, you will be there forever. This profound belief in carrying one's earthly status into eternity reached perhaps its most dramatic expression with the chariot burial. After the gold masks and the mounds of earth, archaeologists made a discovery that seems pulled directly from epic poetry. The chieftain laid to rest not just with his treasures, but with his entire chariot. Picture the scene within the tomb. The wooden frame of the vehicle, often remarkably preserved, stands silent. The two spoked wheels, taller than a person, are fixed in place. And in some of the most poignant finds, the horses that pulled it are buried nearby, sometimes still in their harnesses, as if ready to charge forward at a moment's notice. This was not merely a grand gesture, it was a complete package for the afterlife, a final ride prepared for a hero. The chariot was the ultimate symbol of Thracian identity. In life, it was a terrifying instrument of war, a mobile command center from which a noble warrior could rain down javelins upon his enemies. It represented speed, shock, and overwhelming force. But it was also a potent status symbol, the ancient equivalent of a luxury limousine, demonstrating immense wealth and the power to command the resources and skilled craftsmen required to build and maintain such a complex machine. The commitment to sending this vehicle into the next world went beyond simple placement. In several burials, evidence points to a ritual known as the killing of the object. The wheels of the chariot might be intentionally bent or damaged, or a spearhead might be broken and laid beside it. To our modern minds, this act of destruction might seem counterintuitive, even disrespectful. Why break a perfectly good chariot before burying it? But for the Thracians, this was a vital spiritual act. They likely believed that objects, like people, had a spirit or a life force. By ritually killing the chariot, they were freeing its spirit from its physical form, allowing it to travel with the chieftain into the realm of the dead. A functional, physical chariot would be useless on a spiritual journey, but its essence, released through this symbolic act, would be perfectly suited for the afterlife. This practice shows a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between the material and the spiritual worlds, transforming a practical object into a sacred companion. What makes this custom even more fascinating is that it was not unique to the Thracians. We find strikingly similar chariot burials among the ancient Scythians of the steppes, the Celts of Western Europe, and even in the heroic tales of Homer's Greece. This pattern points to a deep, shared heritage among these widely dispersed Indo-European cultures. Their warrior elites from the Balkans to the Black Sea seemingly independently arrived at the same profound conclusion, that a true leader cannot walk into the afterlife. He must arrive in style with the full regalia of his power, and the chariot was the most powerful vehicle for that symbolic journey. It underscores a common belief system where status was non-negotiable and the afterlife was a direct continuation of a warrior's earthly existence. The Thracian chariot burial, therefore, is more than a local curiosity. It is a chapter in a much larger story of how ancient civilizations conceptualized death and honor. The archaeological evidence brings this custom to life with startling clarity. At the Sveshtari tomb in northeastern Bulgaria, excavators found not just the impressions of decayed wood from a chariot, but the actual iron tires of the wheels and the bronze decorations that once adorned its frame. In other mounds, the skeletons of 2 horses have been found carefully positioned in a specific corner of the burial chamber, their heads often oriented in the same direction as the deceased chieftain. This careful arrangement reveals a ceremony of great significance, a final procession into the tomb that was conducted with solemn precision. The inclusion of the horses is perhaps the most emotionally resonant aspect of all. These were not disposable assets, they were valued partners, the very source of the warrior's speed and power. To sacrifice them and include them in the grave was the highest possible tribute, ensuring that the chieftain would lack for nothing in the world to come. His authority, his mobility, and his most loyal companions were all sealed within the tomb with him, a complete package for a king's eternal reign. Yet for all the grandeur of chariots and gold, the Thracian journey into the afterlife was not always a solitary one. We now turn to a custom that creates a profound ethical and cultural chasm between their world and our own, the practice of human sacrifice or retainer burial. Within the sacred silence of the tomb, archaeologists have sometimes uncovered a more somber scene. Alongside the central, lavishly adorned chieftain, other skeletons lie. These are not rivals or prisoners of war buried as trophies. Their placement suggests they were servants, attendants, or even family members, interred at the same time to accompany their leader into the next world. This is perhaps the most challenging concept for us to grasp, a practice that seems to contradict the very value of human life. But to the Thracians, it was a logical extension of their core belief that death was a transition to a similar but shadowy existence where a person's needs and status remained unchanged. A powerful chieftain would require his retinue just as much in the afterlife as he did in this one. His authority would be meaningless without subjects to command, his comfort impossible without servants to attend to him. The most vivid account of this practice comes not from a spade, but from a scroll, the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus. He describes the funeral of a prominent Thracian, a multi-day event filled with feasting, games, and displays of grief. Then, at the culmination of the ceremony, a deeply unsettling event would occur. Herodotus claims that the deceased man's favorite wife would be put to the question by the other wives of the household. The honor of accompanying their husband was so great that they would compete for it, and the chosen woman would be hailed as the most fortunate. Following a final ritual, she would then be slain upon the tomb and buried alongside him. Herodotus, viewing this through a Greek lens, presents it with a mixture of fascination and horror, yet he underscores the voluntary nature of the act, framed not as murder but as the ultimate act of devotion and a ticket to eternal prestige. While we must always approach ancient historical accounts with a critical eye, the archaeological evidence from several tombs provides a chilling corroboration. In some mounds, the central burial is surrounded by other individuals, often showing no signs of trauma, suggesting poison or strangulation, methods that would leave the body intact for its journey. To understand this, we must set aside our modern sensibilities and step into a world where the community and the afterlife were paramount. For a servant or a wife to be chosen for this fate might not have been seen as a death sentence but as a promotion. It was a guarantee of a privileged place in the next life, remaining at the side of a powerful figure for eternity. In a culture with a rigid social hierarchy, this could be perceived as the highest honor, a way to secure one's spiritual destiny. The act itself was likely embedded in a complex web of ritual that transformed it from a simple killing into a sacred passage. The celebration Herodotus mentions was crucial. It was a communal affirmation of the belief, a way for the living to send off not just one soul, but several, ensuring the social order was maintained in the unseen realm. This wasn't an act of cruelty, but one of profound, if terrifying, religious conviction. The discovery of such burials forces a difficult dialogue between our world and theirs. From our contemporary perspective, it is an undeniable tragedy, a violation of individual rights, but to judge the Thracians by our standards is to misunderstand them completely. Their reality was shaped by a spiritual framework where the continuity of the soul and the stability of the cosmic order outweighed the temporary existence of a single individual. The retainer burial was the ultimate expression of a society that believed so fervently in life after death that they were willing to make the ultimate investment in its quality. It reveals a culture where loyalty and duty extended beyond the grave, and where the bond between a leader and his people was considered unbreakable even by death itself. This custom, darker than the glitter of gold, shows us that the Thracian preparation for the afterlife was not just about material wealth, but about preserving the very fabric of their society for all eternity. Moving from the solemn sacrifices that accompanied the elite, we encounter a symbol of raw, elemental power that resonated through Thracian spirituality, the labris or double-headed axe. This was no ordinary tool of war or woodcutting. It was a sacred object, a potent emblem of divine authority that frequently found its final resting place alongside the deceased. Unlike the personal adornment of a death mask or the practical utility of a chariot, the labris speaks to a deeper, more metaphysical layer of Thracian belief. Its distinctive form, with a blade on each side of a central shaft, created a perfect axis of symmetry, a visual representation of balance and overwhelming force. For the Thracians, this iconic weapon was intrinsically linked to their supreme god, a deity known to the Greeks as Zeus or Sabazios, but who the Thracians likely worshipped as a great god of the sky, lightning, and supreme power. The double axe was seen as a manifestation of his thunderbolt, a weapon capable of cleaving the earth and sky, and thus it carried his direct protective blessing. When a labris was placed within a tomb, its purpose was multifaceted. On one level, it served as a powerful apotropaic object, a charm to ward off evil spirits that might threaten the soul's vulnerable journey to the afterlife. Imagine the axe positioned near the body, its gleaming blades acting as a spiritual guard, creating a sacred, protected space around the deceased, but its function likely went beyond passive protection. Scholars suggest the labris may have been a ritual tool used in sacrifices, perhaps even the very instrument that facilitated the offerings meant to appease the gods and secure safe passage. In this context, burying it with the dead was like providing them with a key, a sacred implement that granted them the authority to perform necessary rites in the next world. The presence of a labris in a grave, therefore, wasn't just about honoring a warrior. It was about equipping a soul with divine power, ensuring they had the means to navigate the supernatural challenges that lay ahead. The type of labris found in a burial tells a vivid story about the individual it accompanied. In the graves of high-ranking warriors and chieftains, we don't find simple iron-working axes. Instead, we discover ceremonial masterpieces crafted from bronze, silver, and even solid gold. These were objects of staggering value and artistic merit, never intended for practical use. Their blades might be intricately decorated with spiral patterns, animal figures, or geometric designs, transforming a weapon of violence into a sublime work of religious art. The choice of precious metals is crucial. A golden labris was not a tool, it was a divine symbol, a direct connection to the celestial realm. Its placement in a tomb suggests the deceased was not merely a fighter, but a figure of immense religious significance, perhaps a priest-king who held both temporal and spiritual authority. He was a man who communed with the gods, and the labyrinth was his badge of office, meant to legitimize his power in the afterlife just as it had in life. This connection to a priestly class adds another fascinating dimension. In many ancient cultures, the ability to conduct sacrifices was the exclusive domain of a religious elite. By including a labyrinth in the grave, the Thracians may have been ensuring that their leader could continue his role as an intermediary between the community and the divine. He would arrive in the afterlife not just as a powerful chieftain, but as a qualified high priest capable of performing the correct rituals to maintain favor with the gods for the benefit of his people who remained among the living. This transforms the tomb from a personal resting place into a kind of eternal temple, with the deceased acting as a perpetual guardian for his lineage and tribe. The labyrinth in this light becomes a symbol of an unbreakable covenant, a promise that the chieftain's protection and divine connections would endure forever. The geographical spread of the labyrinth symbol underscores its profound importance, reaching far beyond the borders of Thracia. We find strikingly similar double axes holding central religious significance in Minoan Crete, where they were associated with a powerful mother goddess, and in Anatolia among the Hittites. This wide distribution points to a very ancient, shared Indo-European religious heritage. The Thracians, the Minoans, and the Anatolian cultures, though separated by vast distances, all seemingly recognize the double axe as an embodiment of ultimate power, whether masculine or feminine. For the Thracians, adopting and adapting this symbol, they made it uniquely their own, cementing it as the primary icon of their supreme sky god. Its persistent presence in their most sacred spaces, their tombs, reveals a civilization deeply invested in the symbols of faith, believing that the right emblem, charged with the right power, could literally shape destiny in the world to come. The silent, gleaming labyrinth in the dark of the tomb was far more than grave goods. It was a passport stamped with divine approval. While the tumulus and the treasures within created a private, sealed world for the dead, the Thracians also felt a powerful need to make a public, permanent statement to the living. This brings us to one of the most haunting and evocative burial customs, the anthropomorphic stelae. Scattered across the landscape, standing like silent, weathered sentinels, these carved stone figures were far more than simple grave markers. They were the eternal representation of the person buried beneath, a stone double believed to contain the very spirit or essence of the deceased. Imagine walking through the Thracian countryside centuries ago. These figures would have been a constant presence, a stark reminder that the ancestors were always watching, forever connected to the land they once ruled. They served as a permanent conduit, a sacred hotline between the bustling world of the living and the silent realm of the dead, ensuring that the memory and influence of a noble ancestor would never fade. The artistry of these stelae is captivating in its powerful simplicity. Unlike the realistic Greek sculptures that aimed for perfect human form, Thracian carvings are abstract and symbolic, reducing the human figure to its most essential, potent elements. They are not portraits in the way we understand them, but rather ideograms of a person. The most common features are a schematic, often T-shaped representation of a face, with heavy, pronounced eyebrows and a long nose forming the central T, and a simple line for a mouth. Below this stark face, the stone is shaped to suggest broad, squared shoulders, and frequently, a belt is carved in relief, sometimes with a dagger or a short sword hanging from it. This style is not a result of a lack of skill, but a deliberate artistic choice. The goal was not to capture a fleeting expression, but to chisel an eternal, unchanging identity, a symbol of strength, vigilance, and authority that would withstand the centuries. The effect is both primitive and profoundly sophisticated, conveying a sense of weight and permanence that a more lifelike statue might lack. Each detail carved into these stone sentinels provides a priceless window into Thracian culture. The emphasis on broad shoulders and a strong physique reflects their ideal of the warrior noble, a person whose power was rooted in physical prowess. The depiction of a belt, often a wide metal girdle, is particularly telling. In Thracian society, the belt was a key symbol of status and adulthood. To be girded was to be ready for action, for war, or for leadership. By including it on the stelae, they were permanently affirming the social rank of the deceased. And then there are the weapons. A finely carved hilt of a dagger or the shape of a sword is not merely decorative, it is a declaration. It states clearly that the individual buried here was a warrior, that their identity and their right to rule were inextricably linked to their martial role. For archaeologists, these are not just stones, they are illustrated biographies providing direct evidence of clothing, armament, and social hierarchy that rarely survives in the archaeological record. The location of these stelae was as ritually significant as their form. They were not placed directly on top of the burial mound itself, but often at a slight distance, perhaps marking the boundary of a sacred precinct or facing a specific direction like the rising sun. This positioning reinforces their role as intermediaries. They stood at the threshold, belonging neither wholly to the cemetery nor to the world outside. It is easy to envision family members or tribespeople leaving small offerings at the base of these figures, a libation of wine, a piece of bread, seeking the favor or counsel of the ancestor they represented. The stela acted as a focal point for this communication, a solid, tangible point of contact. In a culture that believed the dead remained active participants in the life of the community, these stone figures were a necessary piece of social and religious infrastructure, making the abstract concept of an afterlife concrete and accessible. What is perhaps most moving is the individuality that shines through despite the stylized conventions. While they follow a general pattern, no two stelae are exactly alike. The proportions of the face, the angle of the shoulders, the specific type of weapon shown all vary. This suggests that the carver, while working within a strict tradition, was still attempting to capture something unique about the person being honored. It was a balance between representing an eternal ideal and acknowledging a specific life. Over time, these silent witnesses have been worn smooth by wind and rain, their features softening, but their powerful presence remains. They stand as a testament to a deep-seated human desire to be remembered, to leave a mark on the world that says, "I was here." For the Thracians, the anthropomorphic stelae were the ultimate solution, ensuring that a noble's name might be forgotten, but their stone soul would endure forever, watching over the land they loved. But for all the permanence of a body laid to rest in a sealed chamber, the Thracians also understood the transformative power of dissolution. Alongside the practice of inhumation, they held a deep reverence for cremation, a method of burial that saw the physical form consumed by flames. This was not a contradictory practice, but rather another pathway on the same spiritual journey, one that emphasized purification and release over preservation. While a chieftain might be buried intact to maintain his earthly form for the afterlife, others in Thracian society were sent on their way through a blazing pyre, their remains transformed into something new and elemental. The choice between burial and burning was likely dictated by a complex interplay of social status, religious belief, and the specific circumstances of death, revealing a culture with a nuanced and multifaceted approach to the great mystery. The process of a Thracian cremation was a solemn and deliberate ritual. It began with the construction of a funeral pyre, a carefully built stack of wood that would become the final earthly vessel for the deceased. The body was placed upon it, and the fire was lit, burning fiercely until the physical form was reduced to its most essential components, ash and calcined bone fragments. This was not a disposal method, it was an alchemical transformation. After the flames died down, the family or community would carefully sift through the cooled embers to collect these remains. The attention given to this collection is crucial. Every fragment was gathered with care, indicating that what was left was still considered sacred, still held the essence of the person. These cremated remains were then placed in a ceramic urn, a simple clay pot that became a new miniature tomb, or sometimes deposited directly into a small pit. Often, this urn or pit would be situated within the precinct of a larger tumulus necropolis, connecting the individual cremated to the community of ancestors, even if their journey had been different. The central symbolism of this practice lies in the nature of fire itself. Across countless ancient cultures, fire was seen as the ultimate purifying agent. It cleansed, it sanitized, and it transmuted base matter into something lighter, airier. For the Thracians, who believed in an afterlife journey for the soul, fire served as the most potent catalyst for that journey. The intense heat was thought to burn away the mortal impurities of the body, the attachments and burdens of earthly life, thus freeing the soul from its physical prison. Where inhumation aimed to protect and maintain the body for its continued use in the next world, cremation sought to dismantle it completely, accelerating the soul's release and ascent. It was a faster, more direct route to the spiritual realm, a belief that the soul could not truly begin its voyage until the body was utterly transformed. So, what determined whether a Thracian was buried or burned? The evidence suggests that social class was a primary factor. The grand inhumation burials with their golden masks and chariots were almost exclusively the domain of the highest elite, the priest kings and warrior chieftains. Their power was so rooted in their physical presence and earthly possessions that their identity needed to be preserved intact. Cremation, on the other hand, may have been the standard rite for a broader swath of society, lesser nobles, skilled warriors, or wealthy merchants. For them, the purification by fire was a dignified and effective path to the afterlife, one that didn't require the immense resources of a tumulus construction but was still deeply sacred. Furthermore, the circumstances of death might have influenced the choice. A warrior who died of sickness might be cremated to purify his body, while one who fell heroically in battle might be buried whole as a testament to his untouched valor. The specific patron deity a person worshipped could also play a role, as different gods might have preferred different types of offerings. The archaeological record provides a fascinating glimpse into this duality. In many Thracian cemeteries, we find a mix of inhumation graves and cremation burials, sometimes right next to each other. This coexistence proves that these were not opposing traditions but complementary ones, two different answers to the same fundamental question. The discovery of urns placed with great care alongside more conventional graves shows a society that accommodated varying beliefs and statuses within its funerary landscape. The presence of grave goods, a simple pottery cup, a bronze fibula, a single spearhead placed alongside the cremation urns tells us that the practice still honored the individual's life and provided for their needs in the afterlife, even if their body had taken a different form. Cremation, therefore, was not a lesser burial but a different kind of honor, a belief that the fastest way to the gods was through the purifying, liberating power of the flame. Now consider the scene after the tomb was sealed. The connection between the living and the dead did not simply end with the final ritual inside the burial chamber. It was an ongoing relationship, and the primary medium for this communication was something we still enjoy today: wine. Step inside any wealthy Thracian tomb, and amidst the gold and weaponry, you will find an astonishing collection of vessels designed for drinking. We are not talking about a few simple cups, but entire sets of exquisite craftsmanship. There are deep, two-handled drinking bowls called chilikes, tall storage jars known as amphorae that would have held vast quantities of wine, and the most spectacular of all, the rhyton. A rhyton is a ceremonial drinking vessel often made of gold or silver, shaped like a horn or an animal's head, a lion, a griffin, or a stag. These were not everyday dinnerware. They were sacred objects, the centerpiece of a ritual that blurred the lines between a funeral, a feast, and a religious ceremony. This ritual was the funeral feast, a crucial final act performed by the living community for the benefit of the departed soul. Before the tomb was closed for eternity, family, friends, and fellow warriors would gather, perhaps within the tomb's antechamber or just outside its entrance. They would share a final meal in the presence of the deceased, a powerful act of solidarity that said, "You are still one of us." But the most important part of this feast was the libation. A libation is the act of pouring out a liquid offering, in this case wine, onto the earth or onto a special altar. As the participants drank from their ornate vessels, they would deliberately pour a portion of their wine onto the ground as a gift for the deceased. This was not wastefulness, it was a sacred transaction. The Thracians believed the spirit of the dead required sustenance for the long journey ahead, and wine, a substance brimming with life and vitality, was the perfect spiritual nourishment. By pouring it into the earth, which was seen as the gateway to the underworld, they were directly delivering this sustenance to their departed loved one. The significance of wine, however, goes far beyond simple sustenance. For the Thracians, wine was a divine substance, and its patron was a god who arguably had his deepest roots in their own culture, Dionysus. Long before the Greeks adopted him as the god of wine and ecstasy, Dionysus was a powerful Thracian deity. To the Thracians, he was not just a party god, he was a deity of profound mysteries, representing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The grapevine itself is a powerful symbol of this cycle. It dies back in the winter only to burst forth with new life in the spring. The fermentation of grape juice into wine was seen as a magical transformation, a process that unlocked a hidden spiritual power within the fruit. Drinking wine, especially in a ritual context, was believed to induce an ecstatic state that brought the participant closer to the divine. In the funeral feast, wine became the ultimate connector. It allowed the living, through a shared, sacred experience, to commune not only with each other but with the gods and with the spirit of the departed, ensuring a safe passage and affirming the eternal cycle of existence. The incredible artistry of the vessels used in these rites speaks volumes about their importance. A gold rhyton ending in a fierce animal head is more than a cup. It is a ritual object that channels the power and attributes of the animal it represents. Drinking from a stag-headed rhyton might be an attempt to absorb the stag's speed and nobility. A griffin, a mythical guardian of treasure, might offer protection on the perilous journey to the afterlife. The very act of drinking from such a magnificent object would have been a transcendent experience, elevating the ritual from a simple toast to a direct engagement with the supernatural. The presence of these masterpieces in tombs tells us that the Thracians wanted their dead to have the finest tools for eternity. They were not just leaving behind a favorite cup, they were providing a certified sacred vessel, approved by the gods themselves, with which the deceased could continue to perform libations and commune with the divine in the world to come. The funeral feast, therefore, was both a farewell and a commissioning, equipping the soul with everything it needed to maintain its status and connections in the afterlife. Beyond the public rituals of feasting and the grand monuments to power, the Thracians harbored a deeper, more secretive spiritual current, one that promised not just a continuation of status, but a transcendent liberation for the soul. This was the world of the Orphic Mysteries, a mystical religious movement whose origins are deeply entwined with Thracian soil, named for the legendary poet and musician Orpheus, who was said to be a Thracian king. Unlike the state-sponsored religions of the Greeks, Orphism was a personal, initiatory cult. It taught that the human soul was divine, a spark of the gods trapped in a cycle of reincarnation within the physical body, which was seen as a tomb. The ultimate goal was to break this cycle, to achieve a blessed existence free from the burdens of mortal life. For those initiated into its secrets, death was not an end to be feared, but a final exam for which they had spent a lifetime studying. The most astonishing archaeological evidence for these beliefs comes in a form that is both delicate and dazzling. Tiny, leaf-thin sheets of gold, no larger than a credit card, known as tumuli. These were not meant for public display. They were discovered carefully folded and placed on the chest, or even more poignantly, inside the mouth of the deceased. This placement was profoundly intentional. By putting the foil in the mouth, the living were giving a voice to the silent soul, equipping it with the words it would need to speak in the world beyond. These were not generic good luck charms. They were meticulously inscribed with minute, often cryptic text, serving as a personalized guidebook or a cheat sheet for navigating the perils of the underworld. Finding one of these lamely is like overhearing a whispered conversation from across the millennia, a direct transmission of hope and instruction meant for the ears of the gods alone. Deciphering the text on these foils reveals a detailed roadmap for the afterlife journey. The soul is instructed to avoid the spring of forgetfulness, a dangerous water source that would cause it to lose all memory of its divine origin and its earthly initiation, thus dooming it to be reborn. Instead, the soul is directed to seek out the lake of memory. Upon finding it, the deceased must recite a specific password or a short speech to the guardians of the afterlife, who are often depicted as stern figures or even a central goddess. One famous example from a Thracian context instructs the soul to say, "I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone." This is a powerful declaration of identity, asserting the soul's true, celestial nature over its temporary earthly prison. It is a password of purity and knowledge, proving that the soul is an initiate who understands the cosmic truth. This concept of a judgment after death, where one's actions and knowledge are weighed, represents a significant evolution in Thracian thought. It moves beyond the simpler idea of an afterlife that merely mirrors one's social standing. In the Orphic view, your wealth or military prowess mattered far less than your spiritual preparation and the knowledge you carried in your heart. The gold lamely were the ultimate insurance policy for this judgment. They provided the exact words needed to pass the test to prove one's worthiness to the divine judges. This suggests a belief in a moral universe where ethical conduct and sacred knowledge were the true currencies of the afterlife, a stark contrast to the chariots and weapons that equipped a chieftain for a more martial eternity. The existence of these lamely forces us to recognize the incredible diversity of belief within Thracian society. On one hand, you had the warrior aristocracy building colossal mounds to project an eternal, earthly power. On the other, you had initiates of a mystery cult seeking a more philosophical and personal salvation, their status marked not by a monument of earth, but by a secret whispered on a golden leaf. This shows a civilization capable of supporting complex, layered spiritualities that catered to different needs and aspirations. The Orphic cult, with its focus on the individual soul's purity and liberation, offers a fascinating counterpoint to the communal, hierarchical beliefs reflected in the tumulus burials, revealing a people with a rich and sophisticated interior spiritual life. While the golden artifacts and stone stelae speak volumes, the Thracians had another, even more vivid way of illustrating their beliefs, one that transformed the cold, dark walls of a tomb into a brilliant portal to the next world. If you were to step inside the Kazanlak tomb in Bulgaria, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, you would be greeted by a breathtaking spectacle. The entire burial chamber is covered in a continuous frieze of frescoes, a vibrant narrative painted in rich shades of red, black, white, and yellow ochre. This is not random decoration. It is a meticulously planned vision of the afterlife, a painted guidebook designed to surround the deceased with the scenes and rituals necessary for their successful transition. The artists did not intend for these works to be seen by the living once the tomb was sealed. They were created for a single, eternal audience, the soul of the person lying within. The narrative unfolds like a storyboard for a grand epic. One of the most common scenes depicts a solemn funeral procession. We see a line of figures, men and women, moving with purpose. The women are often shown carrying gifts, vessels, textiles, perhaps even a small chest, while the men might be leading horses or standing guard. This scene serves a powerful dual function. For the soul, it is a perpetual reenactment of the honor they received, a constant reminder of their status and the community that mourned them. But it is also a magical reinforcement. By painting the ritual, the Thracians may have believed they were making it eternally true, ensuring the deceased would forever be celebrated. Further along the walls, the mood shifts to dynamic energy with scenes of chariot races. These aren't just sporting events, they are symbolic of the journey itself. The chariot, that potent symbol of status and mobility, is shown in action, representing the soul's swift and triumphant passage through the underworld, overcoming any obstacles in its path. Perhaps the most important scene is the culminating feast. Here we see the central figure, the deceased, seated and receiving offerings from attendants. He is often shown larger than the other figures, a common artistic convention to denote importance. This is the eternal banquet, the reward for a life well lived. But the paintings go a step further, depicting encounters between the deceased and divine figures. A goddess might be shown offering a cup or a piece of jewelry, a direct welcome into the company of the gods. This transforms the tomb from a static waiting room into an active, participatory space. The soul is not just hoping for a good afterlife, it is being shown its successful arrival, interacting with deities, and taking its rightful place in a celestial hierarchy. These frescoes were a form of sympathetic magic, a way of painting the desired reality into existence for all eternity. The artistic style of these masterpieces is a fascinating fusion of cultural influences. You can clearly see the technical skill of Hellenistic Greek art in the realistic proportions of the figures, the sense of movement in the chariot scenes, and the skillful use of shading to create depth. However, the spirit and the symbolism are distinctly Thracian. The clothing worn by the figures is not Greek, it is authentic Thracian attire. The themes of chariots, horses, and feasting are drawn directly from their own warrior culture, not Greek mythology. This blend shows a society that was confident enough to adopt technical advancements from their neighbors while fiercely maintaining its own unique identity and spiritual core. The colors themselves were chosen with purpose. The dominant red ochre, for instance, was not just a pigment. It was a color associated with life, blood, and the earth, while the black might symbolize the mystery of the underworld, creating a balanced palette that represented the entire cycle of existence. Ultimately, these tomb paintings were far more than beautiful art. They were a functional, essential component of the burial rite. Think of them as the earliest known virtual reality, an immersive environment designed to guide and comfort the soul. By surrounding the deceased with images of a successful funeral, a heroic journey, and a divine welcome, the living were providing the ultimate spiritual insurance. They were creating a self-fulfilling prophecy in paint and plaster, ensuring that their loved one would not get lost or forget their purpose. The vivid scenes on the walls of the Kazanlak tomb and others like it are a testament to the Thracian desire to control the uncontrollable, to use human creativity to build a bridge across the great unknown, making the afterlife not a place of shadow and fear, but a brilliantly illuminated, confidently navigated destination. After ensuring the soul was welcomed into the afterlife through painted walls and golden passwords, the Thracians demonstrated that their care for the deceased was an ongoing process, one that could involve a second, equally significant act of burial. Beyond the initial funeral rites, they practiced what is known as secondary burial, a profound ritual where the journey of the dead was not considered complete until the body itself had undergone a final, visible transformation. Imagine this: months or even years after the primary burial, the community would return to the grave. They would carefully exhume the remains, but by this time the work of nature was done. The soft tissues had decomposed, leaving behind only the clean, white skeleton. These bones were not treated as gruesome relics, they were seen as the purified, lasting essence of the individual. This second ceremony was a crucial step, marking the soul's final release from its earthly ties and its full integration into the world of the ancestors. The reasons behind this complex practice are deeply rooted in both spiritual belief and practical necessity. On a spiritual level, the Thracians likely viewed death as a multi-stage process. The first burial or primary inhumation was for the recently deceased, a person whose spirit might still be clinging to the familiar world of the living. The period of decomposition was not seen as decay but as a necessary purification. It was the time it took for the soul to fully detach from the body. Once only the bones remained, the person was considered to have completed their transition. They were no longer a recently departed spirit but a fully realized ancestor. The secondary burial was in effect a graduation ceremony, moving the individual from one spiritual category to a more permanent and revered one. This practice reflects a sophisticated understanding of death as a journey with distinct phases, each requiring its own specific ritual to ensure a successful conclusion. There was also a very practical dimension, especially concerning the use of valuable space. In areas with rocky terrain or within family burial mounds, tomb space was limited. The practice of secondary burial allowed for the efficient and respectful reuse of a burial chamber. After the bones were collected for their final resting place, the primary grave could be used for another member of the family. This was not an act of disrespect but a practical solution that honored the continuum of the lineage. It kept generations of a family together in a single, sacred space, reinforcing social bonds and affirming that even in death, the family unit remained unbroken. This combination of profound spiritual belief and sensible land management shows a culture that seamlessly wove the sacred and the practical into the fabric of daily life. The treatment of the bones during this second burial reveals an incredible depth of continued reverence. The skeletons were not haphazardly gathered. They were meticulously cleaned, often arranged in a specific, orderly pattern. In some cases, the long bones like femurs and tibias were neatly bundled together, and the skull was placed respectfully on top. But the care went even further. Archaeologists have discovered bones, particularly skulls, that were carefully painted with red ochre. This earthy pigment, made from iron oxide, held immense symbolic power across the ancient world. Its color, the deep red of blood and life, was likely intended to revitalize the bones, to symbolically restore the life force to the individual's eternal remains. By adorning the bones with ochre, the living were actively participating in the final transformation of their ancestor, ensuring they would enter the next world not as a pale shadow, but as a vibrant, empowered being. These collected and honored bones often found their final home in a special container known as an ossuary or bone box. These could be simple ceramic pots or beautifully carved stone chests. The ossuary itself became a miniature tomb, a sacred vessel containing the distilled physical essence of a person. This practice stands in stark contrast to the primary inhumation of a chieftain laid out in full regalia. One practice aims to preserve the entire earthly form, while the other focuses on honoring the durable core. The architectural framework that survives after all else has returned to the earth. This contrast reveals a nuanced Thracian concept of the body itself. They understood that the mortal coil had two aspects: the temporary, corruptible flesh that housed the spirit in life, and the permanent, enduring bones that served as its eternal monument. Secondary burial was the process of separating the two, of acknowledging the transience of the flesh while celebrating the permanence of the bone, a powerful metaphor for the soul's own journey from mortal life to immortal existence. But the honor of a chariot burial was not the only way a Thracian noble could express their profound connection to the horse. Beyond the integrated chariots, we find a distinct and equally powerful custom: the separate burial of horses themselves. In numerous tumuli, archaeologists have uncovered deep pits situated right next to the main human tomb, and within them lie the complete skeletons of horses, carefully arranged and often accompanied by their own treasures. These were not casual inclusions. They were deliberate, respectful interments for creatures considered to be far more than mere property. For the Thracian warrior aristocracy, the horse was the very foundation of their identity, a living embodiment of speed, power, and nobility. To be buried with your horse was to make an undeniable statement about who you were and, more importantly, who you would continue to be in the next life. This practice elevates the animal from a simple mode of transport to a sacred companion, a being whose own spirit was deemed worthy of an honored journey. The manner of these burials reveals a ceremony of great significance. These horses were not simply led into a pit and covered over. The evidence points to a deliberate sacrificial rite. In some cases, the animals show no signs of violent trauma, suggesting they may have been dispatched using a method that preserved the body's integrity, perhaps through poison or a precise blow that left no mark on the skeleton. The goal was likely to present an unblemished offering to the gods and a pristine companion for the deceased. In other burials, the horses were found with their elaborate harnesses still in place, bronze bits in their mouths, decorative phalerus or round metal plaques adorning their chests, and intricate frontlets on their heads. This is a crucial detail. They were buried in full regalia, dressed for a ceremonial parade, not for a battle. This transforms the act from a simple sacrifice into a formal presentation, as if the horse was being officially commissioned for eternal service. The community was not just killing an animal, they were outfitting a soul for a divine mission. The number of horses interred speaks a clear language of status and wealth. A single horse was a significant honor, a statement that the deceased was a mounted warrior of note. But the discovery of two horses buried together is far more common, and this pairing is deeply symbolic. Two horses represent a team, the essential unit for pulling a chariot or for serving as a pair of riding horses for a noble. This suggests that even if a full chariot was not included in the tomb, the concept of the chariot team, the power of a paired force, was still central to the individual's identity. In the most extravagant burials, we find evidence of 4, 6, or even more horses. This is an almost unimaginable display of riches, the equivalent of burying a fleet of luxury cars today. Each horse represented a substantial investment, and to sacrifice so many was a staggering declaration of power, ensuring that the chieftain would command an entire cavalry unit in the afterlife. The herd size was a direct and unambiguous measure of a person standing within the tribe's rigid hierarchy. This profound relationship between Thracian and horse is further illuminated by their own ancient coinage. If you look at the silver coins minted by various Thracian tribes, you will see a recurring motif: a warrior on horseback, often in a rearing position, lance in hand. This was their chosen symbol of sovereignty, the image they wanted to represent their people in trade and diplomacy. It tells us that their identity was inextricably linked to the power of the mounted warrior. This wasn't just a military advantage, it was a cultural obsession. The horse provided mobility across their vast territories, a decisive edge in battle against slower infantry, and a powerful symbol of aristocratic privilege. To be a Thracian noble was to be a horseman. Therefore, ensuring that this partnership continued after death was not a luxury, it was a necessity for maintaining the natural order of the cosmos. The horse sacrifice was the ultimate affirmation of a bond that defined their very way of life, a promise that the thunder of hooves would echo through eternity. But what happens when there is no body to bury? The Thracians faced this heartbreaking reality with a remarkable solution that reveals their profound commitment to ritual: the cenotaph, or empty tomb. In an age of frequent warfare and long-distance travel, it was a common tragedy for a warrior to fall on a distant battlefield or for a trader to perish on a journey, his body lost forever. For a culture that believed the proper funeral rites were essential for the soul's peace, this presented a spiritual crisis. Without a body, how could the soul find its rest? Without a grave, how could the family honor their dead? The cenotaph was their answer, a powerful, symbolic act of closure that built a home for a soul without a body, proving that for the Thracians, the intention and the ritual could be as potent as physical remains. These were not merely symbolic markers, they were full-fledged tombs constructed with the same care and resources as a standard burial. A Thracian cenotaph could be a smaller tumulus or a stone-built chamber, indistinguishable from the outside from any other noble's resting place. The family would go through the full funeral ceremony, processing to the site, delivering eulogies, and conducting the same rituals they would if their loved one were present. Then they would fill the chamber with a complete set of grave goods. Archaeologists have uncovered cenotaphs containing everything from a warrior's full panoply of weapons, a sword, spear, and shield, to fine pottery, jewelry, and even ceremonial vessels. This practice was rooted in a powerful belief that the spirit of the deceased could be invoked and attracted to the site through the power of the ritual and the presence of their personal belongings. The tomb, the offerings, and the ceremony combined to create a focal point for the soul, a designated anchor in the landscape that prevented it from becoming a lost, wandering ghost. It was an act of love and duty, ensuring that even in absence, the deceased received the honor they were due. For modern archaeologists, however, these empty tombs present a fascinating puzzle. The great challenge is distinguishing a deliberate cenotaph from a tomb that was simply looted in antiquity. A ransacked burial chamber, stripped of its valuables and its body potentially dragged out and scattered, can look very similar to an empty tomb built that way on purpose. The key to solving this mystery lies in the subtle details of the site. In a looted tomb, you often find signs of violence and haste, a broken door seal, tools marks around the entrance, or fragments of the coffin or artifacts left behind in the rubble. A true cenotaph, by contrast, shows a different story. The absence of a body is peaceful and intentional. The grave goods are often found neatly arranged, as if placed with care for an occupant who was always expected to be absent. There might be no coffin at all, or a sarcophagus that was clearly never used. Perhaps the most telling clue is the presence of a personal item so specific that it could only belong to the honored individual. A named ring, a unique piece of armor, or an inscribed weapon, left there permanently as a proxy for the person themselves. This practice offers a profound insight into the Thracian mind. It demonstrates that their funerary rites were not just about disposing of a physical body. They were about managing the spiritual well-being of both the deceased and the living community. A cenotaph provided a crucial geographical and psychological focal point for grief. It gave the family a real place to visit, to make offerings, and to feel connected to their lost member. This prevented the unresolved grief and spiritual anxiety that would come from a complete absence of a grave. The community could collectively acknowledge the death, celebrate the life, and ensure the stability of the social order, even when fate had denied them the closure of a body. The cenotaph, therefore, stands as a testament to the power of ritual to overcome even the most painful of circumstances, creating a space for memory to flourish and for the soul to find its eternal home. Yet even the solemnity of a cenotaph cannot prepare us for what is perhaps the most challenging and enigmatic of all Thracian funerary practices. We now move from burials of absence to a custom that involves a profound and deliberate manipulation of the physical body itself, ritual dismemberment and reassembly. In several Thracian tombs, archaeologists have made discoveries that defy simple explanation. They have uncovered skeletons where the bones are not laid out in their natural anatomical order. A skull might be placed at the feet, the arms arranged across the chest but with the hand bones nestled near the ribs and the leg bones stacked neatly beside the torso. This is not the haphazard result of looting or natural decay. The careful, intentional placement of each bone indicates a ceremony that involved taking the body apart after death and then putting it back together again in a new, symbolic configuration. This grisly practice forces us to confront a side of Thracian spirituality that is far removed from the golden feasts and chariot processions, one rooted in deep-seated fears about the power of the dead and the precarious journey of the soul. The immediate and most compelling theory for this practice revolves around the concept of apotropaic magic rituals designed to ward off evil. In many ancient cultures, there was a pervasive fear that the dead, particularly those who died suddenly, violently, or with unfinished business, could return as malevolent spirits to haunt the living. By dismembering the body and rearranging the bones, the Thracians may have been performing a powerful act of spiritual neutralization. They were essentially creating a ritual lock on the corpse. If a spirit required its physical body to be intact in order to walk the earth again, then rendering that body anatomically incomplete would trap the soul in the afterlife, preventing it from returning as a vengeful ghost. The specific arrangement of the bones might have held a symbolic meaning, perhaps mimicking a fetal position to signify a rebirth into the next world, or creating a sacred geometric pattern that bound the spirit to its new, peaceful rest. Another interpretation moves beyond fear and into the realm of profound cosmological belief. For a people who practiced secondary burial and saw the bones as the purified, eternal essence of a person, the act of disassembly and reassembly could have been the ultimate rite of passage. This theory suggests the ritual was a reenactment of a myth of creation, perhaps a story of a god or hero who was torn apart and remade. By subjecting the deceased to this process, the community was actively participating in the rebirth of the individual's soul. The careful reassembly of the bones was not just about putting a puzzle back together. It was about constructing a new spiritual body, purified and perfected for its existence in the afterlife. Each bone, touched and placed with intention, was being consecrated, its connection to the mortal world severed so it could be reconsecrated for the divine. The archaeological evidence for this is both sparse and hauntingly specific. One of the most cited examples comes from a tomb in Bulgaria, where the skeleton of an adult male was found with his skull detached and placed between his thigh bones. His arm bones were crossed over his chest, but the bones of his hands were missing entirely, suggesting they may have been removed as part of the ritual. In another burial, a body was found with the vertebrae of the spine deliberately separated and stacked in a small pile near the pelvis. These are not casual disturbances. The precision required to separate joints without damaging the bone points to a deep understanding of anatomy, likely performed by a specialist, a priest or ritual expert after the initial stages of decomposition had made the task easier. The absence of certain bones, like the small bones of the hands and feet, is particularly telling. It suggests these parts may have been kept as powerful relics by the family or community, or perhaps destroyed in a separate rite to fully sever the deceased's connection to the physical world. Scholars remain deeply divided on the interpretation of these perplexing finds. Some argue that what appears to be ritual dismemberment could, in some cases, be the result of later disturbances. Ancient grave robbers searching for valuables might have moved bones carelessly. However, this explanation fails to account for the deliberate, almost reverent arrangements that are observed. Robbers would not neatly stack vertebrae or place a skull with such specific orientation. Another point of debate is whether this practice was reserved for specific individuals. Was it an honorific rite for high-status individuals, a dangerous procedure for those deemed likely to become restless ghosts, or perhaps even a punishment for social deviants, ensuring they could never trouble the community again? The lack of written records from the Thracians themselves means we are left to piece together the motive from the silent, stark evidence of the bones. This ongoing debate highlights the fundamental challenge of archaeology. We can often see what people did, but understanding why they did it requires us to cross a bridge of interpretation into the lost world of their beliefs. The rearranged bones in these Thracian tombs are a powerful, unsettling reminder that for them, the body in death was not a mere shell, but a potent object that held the key to the soul's final destiny. After confronting the enigma of the rearranged body, we turn to a practice that speaks a more universal language of symbolism, one that painted the final journey not in shades of fear, but in the vibrant color of life itself. Across countless Thracian graves, from the simplest pit to the most elaborate chamber tomb, archaeologists have uncovered a startling and consistent feature: a deep crimson stain. This is the residue of red ochre, a natural earth pigment rich in iron oxide, deliberately sprinkled over the body, the bones, or the burial goods. It wasn't a random act, it was a deliberate anointing, a final, powerful gesture meant to coat the deceased in a color bursting with meaning. Imagine the scene at the close of a funeral. As the body was laid to rest, a mourner would take a handful of this powdered pigment and let it fall, covering the pale skin or the clean white bones in a blanket of vivid red. In that moment, the grave was transformed from a place of ending into a womb of potential, saturated with the most essential substance the Thracians knew: the color of life. The symbolism of red ochre is as primal as humanity itself, and for the Thracians, its associations were multilayered and profound. First and foremost, it was the color of blood, the very force of life. By covering the body in red ochre, they were performing a powerful act of sympathetic magic. They were symbolically restoring the lifeblood that had departed, re-energizing the physical form for the challenges of the afterlife. It was a way of saying, you are not empty, you are still full of vitality. This connects directly to their belief in rebirth and regeneration. Just as the red sun sets only to rise again, the application of ochre was a prayer for the soul's own cyclical return or its successful rebirth into a new existence. Furthermore, the durability of the pigment was significant. Unlike organic materials that decay, ochre is permanent. It stains the earth and the bones for millennia. This permanence would have been seen as a form of protection, a permanent shield of life force energy that would guard the soul on its perilous journey, ensuring its essence remained potent and undiminished by the passage through the underworld. While red ochre was the most prominent, the Thracian color palette for the dead was not monochromatic. Evidence, though more fragile, points to the use of other symbolic colors. In some burials, traces of white clay have been found. White, the color of bones, milk, and moonlight, likely symbolized purity, the spirit world, and a cleansing transition. It may have been used to purify the body, to wash it of the impurities of earthly life and prepare it for its incorporeal existence. The textiles that have partially survived in exceptionally dry conditions sometimes reveal hints of their original dyes. The presence of blue, possibly derived from woad, might have been associated with the sky and the divine realm, while a deep, rich purple, an incredibly expensive dye, would have been reserved for the highest elite, signaling their royal or divine status even in death. These colors weren't merely decorative, they were a visual language, a non-verbal code that communicated specific wishes and attributes for the deceased's next life. The visual impact of this practice, even after 25 centuries, is incredibly powerful. For archaeologists, the moment they uncover a burial stained with ochre is always arresting. The stark, dramatic contrast between the white of the exposed bones and the rich, red earth surrounding them creates an image that is both beautiful and deeply moving. It's a snapshot of a final, caring act frozen in time. This visual cue is so strong that it often helps excavators immediately distinguish a human burial from an animal intrusion or a natural soil feature. In a way, the Thracians used color to make their dead highly visible, not just to the living, but perhaps to the gods themselves, ensuring that the individual would be seen, recognized, and properly guided. The use of ochre transcends the specific beliefs of the Thracians and connects them to a truly ancient, global human tradition. From the Paleolithic burials of Europe to the prehistoric tombs of the Americas, red ochre has been humanity's go-to pigment for honoring the dead for tens of thousands of years. This suggests that the Thracians were tapping into a deep, almost instinctual human understanding of red as the color of life, death, and what lies between, making their practice feel both uniquely their own and universally human. But for all the grandeur devoted to warriors and chieftains, the Thracian approach to death held a deeply poignant space for its youngest members. The burial of a child was handled with a quiet tenderness that speaks volumes about their values, revealing that their funerary customs were not solely about power, but also about profound love and loss. Unlike the elite adults who were laid to rest in monumental tumuli on distant hilltops, infants and young children were very often buried in a much more intimate setting, right within the boundaries of the settlement itself. In a practice that might seem unusual to us, they were frequently interred beneath the very floors of their family homes or tucked just outside the doorway. This was not an act of disposability, but rather one of heartbreaking connection. The family wanted to keep their child close, to have them remain a physical part of the household even in death. It suggests a belief that the spirit of a young child, perhaps not yet fully integrated into the wider world, would find comfort and protection in the familiar surroundings of home, surrounded by the living family who loved them. The grave goods accompanying these small burials are particularly moving. Archaeologists do not find the full-sized chariots or golden masks of the elite. Instead, they uncover tiny, meticulously crafted versions of adult objects. A miniature ceramic cup, perfectly formed but small enough to fit in a child's hand. A little pottery bowl. For a boy, there might be a small, non-functional spearhead or a tiny bronze dagger. For a girl, a delicate bracelet or a small bead necklace. These were not toys in the modern sense of the word. They were symbolic offerings, scaled-down projections of the adult life the child was never able to live. By providing these items, the parents were affirming their child's place in the community and preparing them for the afterlife as a full member of Thracian society. They were, in effect, outfitting the child's soul for the roles they would have assumed as a warrior, a potter, a parent in the world to come, ensuring they would lack for nothing despite their tragically shortened lives. This practice offers a rare and precious window into Thracian concepts of childhood and personhood. The care taken in these burials makes it clear that children were considered valuable individuals from the moment of their birth. Their deaths were not dismissed as insignificant. They were mourned with a ritualized grief that acknowledged the loss of potential. The inclusion of gender-specific goods, even for the very young, indicates that social roles were ascribed early on, and the family sought to honor that anticipated identity in the afterlife. Furthermore, burying a child within the home suggests a different spiritual trajectory. Perhaps they believed a young soul required the ongoing presence and protection of its living family to navigate the afterlife safely, unlike an adult warrior whose spirit was considered strong enough to depart for a distant, heroic realm. These small graves, often overlooked in favor of more spectacular finds, tell a story of familial devotion that transcends time, reminding us that the Thracians, for all their martial prowess, cherished their children with a love that echoes our own. Now we come to a burial custom that captures the Thracian worldview in a single, elegant object, the amphora burial. Instead of a stone chamber or a simple pit in the ground, the deceased was laid to rest inside a large pottery jar. Imagine a beautiful, curved amphora, the kind used for storing wine or oil, but now serving as the final vessel for a human body. The body was carefully placed inside in a tightly crouched or fetal position, knees drawn up to the chest as if returning to the very beginning of life. This powerful posture is the key to understanding the practice. For the Thracians, the amphora was not just a convenient container, it was a symbolic womb. They saw death not as a final exit, but as a return to a primal, nurturing state, a necessary step before a potential rebirth. The jar, sealed and placed in the earth, became a sacred cocoon where the process of transformation could take place, protecting the seed of the soul until it was ready to emerge into a new existence. This practice also had a deeply practical side, especially for members of the community who may not have had the resources for a grand tumulus. A large ceramic jar was a durable, accessible, and effective way to protect the body from the soil's moisture and the pressure of the earth above. It created a clean, defined personal space for the deceased, a miniature tomb that was far simpler to construct than a stone chamber. The type of jar used tells its own story. Archaeologists find everything from massive, coarse-ware pithoi, which were stationary storage jars almost the size of a person, to more slender, finely crafted transport amphorae. These transport jars are particularly fascinating because they often bear the stamps of their place of origin. A burial amphora might have been made in a Greek colony on the Black Sea coast or on the island of Thracian, indicating that even in death, the Thracians were connected to wider Mediterranean trade networks. For researchers, these jars are like time capsules within time capsules. Their shape and stamps provide a precise date for the burial, helping to build a chronological framework for entire cemeteries and trace the economic links between the Thracian interior and the coastal trading world. The choice of an amphora, a vessel so intimately linked with the vital liquids of life, wine, oil, and water, adds another layer of meaning. By placing a body inside a container designed to hold the essence of sustenance and ritual, the Thracians may have been symbolically ensuring the deceased would never want for nourishment in the afterlife. The jar that once held the wine for festive libations now held the person themselves, creating a direct, tangible connection between the rituals of life and the mysteries of death. This custom, so simple in its execution, reveals a sophisticated blend of practical necessity, spiritual hope, and a beautiful, poetic belief in the cyclical nature of all existence, where the end is always a potential beginning. Amidst the golden treasures and solemn human sacrifices, another presence is often found in Thracian tombs, a quieter, yet equally profound companion. The discovery of dog remains, carefully interred alongside their masters or positioned as silent sentinels at the entrance to burial chambers, reveals a bond that transcended the mortal world. This was not a casual inclusion. It was a deliberate act grounded in a complex belief system that assigned the canine multiple sacred roles in the journey to the afterlife. For the Thracians, a dog was far more than a pet. It was a loyal guardian, a protective spirit, and most importantly, a trusted guide for the soul navigating the terrifying unknowns of the underworld. The most straightforward role of the dog was that of a tomb guardian. In several burials, a dog's skeleton has been found right at the threshold of the burial chamber or in the narrow passage, known as a dromos, leading to it. Placed in this strategic position, the animal was believed to serve a vital apotropaic function, using its innate ferocity and vigilance to ward off malevolent spirits or any human intruders who might desecrate the sacred space. This practice reflects a belief that the dog's protective instincts, so valued in life, would continue unabated in death. The Thracians, like many ancient peoples, saw the afterlife as a mirrored reflection of the living world, complete with its own dangers. By stationing a loyal dog at the door, they were ensuring their chieftain's eternal rest would remain undisturbed, creating a spiritual security system that would last for eternity. But the dog's duties extended far beyond simple guard duty. Its most significant role was that of a psychopomp, a spirit guide whose task was to lead the soul of the deceased through the perils of the underworld. This concept of a canine guide is a powerful and widespread archetype. The most famous example is, of course, the Greek Cerberus, the multi-headed hound who guarded the entrance to Hades. Yet, for the Greeks, Cerberus was a fearsome obstacle to be overcome. The Thracian perspective appears to have been quite different. Their dogs were not monstrous barriers, but benevolent companions. A Thracian noble would not need to battle or trick a Cerberus. Instead, his own faithful dog, a spirit he knew and trusted from life, would be waiting to escort him safely past any dangers, using its animal instincts to find the correct path through the shadowy realm. This transforms the journey from a terrifying ordeal into a guided tour with a loyal friend by one's side. The treatment of these dogs in death provides undeniable proof of their valued status. These were not simply discarded after ritual killing. In a burial mound at Esporian Novo, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a large dog lying near its master. The animal was buried with a degree of care that speaks of affection and respect. Its body was arranged peacefully, and it was found with its own bronze collar, a mark of its belonging and importance. This collar was not just a functional item, it was a symbol of the bond between man and beast, a bond deemed strong enough to survive the ultimate separation. In other tombs, dogs have been found with their own small offerings, such as a piece of meat placed near their skulls, ensuring they too would have sustenance for the long journey ahead. This reciprocity is touching the master provided for his guide, acknowledging that the dog's service required its own reward. This profound relationship finds echoes across the ancient world, suggesting a deep-seated, almost universal recognition of the dog's unique qualities. The Egyptians revered Anubis, the jackal-headed god who presided over embalming and guided souls to the judgment hall. In ancient Persia, dogs were considered sacred and were featured in Zoroastrian death rites. What sets the Thracian practice apart is its intimate, personal nature. They were not invoking a distant, abstract god like Anubis. They were relying on a specific, familiar animal that had shared their hearth and home. This practice highlights a key aspect of the Thracian worldview. The bonds of loyalty and companionship forged in life were the very tools needed to ensure salvation in death. By including a dog in the tomb, the Thracians were making a profound statement about faith, friendship, and the unwavering hope that even in the face of the great unknown, you would not have to walk alone. Imagine the scene within the tomb as the final offering is made, the air still thick with the smell of wine and incense, but the ceremony is not yet complete. A profound silence descends, one that is about to be filled with a sound meant to bridge the worlds. The Thracians understood that a proper send-off required more than just visual splendor. It needed a soundtrack. This brings us to a custom that appealed directly to the senses, the burial of musical instruments. In the tombs of wealthy chieftains, alongside the golden masks and ceremonial weapons, archaeologists have uncovered a different kind of treasure: exquisitely crafted musical instruments made of bronze, silver, and even gold. These were not mere decorative objects, they were essential tools for the journey, believed to hold the power to protect, appease, and entertain the soul for all eternity. The types of instruments chosen reveal a carefully considered auditory landscape for the afterlife. Among the most common finds are percussion instruments, particularly bronze and silver rattles, known as sistra, and small bells. The sound of these instruments was sharp, rhythmic, and penetrating. In a spiritual context, this was not about melody but about creating a barrier of pure, disruptive noise. The Thracians, like many ancient peoples, believed that evil spirits were repelled by certain sounds. The jangling of bells and the shaking of a sistrum created a sonic shield around the deceased, a protective aura that would confuse and drive away any malevolent forces lurking in the underworld. But their purpose was also one of communication. The clear, ringing tone of a bell was thought to be a way to get the attention of the gods, a signal that a soul was approaching and required guidance. It was an auditory flare shot into the silence of death. For the highest echelons of society, however, the instrument of choice was the lyre. Discovering a lyre in a Thracian tomb is a finding of immense significance. This was not an instrument for warding off spirits, but for communing with them. The lyre, a stringed instrument often made of wood with a tortoiseshell soundbox and strings of gut, was the instrument of poets, philosophers, and aristocrats. In the hands of a skilled player, it could produce complex melodies and accompany epic poetry. By including a lyre in the grave, the Thracians were ensuring their chieftain could participate in the eternal feast not just as a guest but as a performer. He could sing the praises of the gods, recount his own heroic deeds, and provide the entertainment that was central to any proper aristocratic gathering, whether in this world or the next. It signaled that the afterlife was a place of culture, refinement, and celestial harmony. The craftsmanship of these instruments elevates them from simple tools to objects of high art. A Thracian ceremonial rattle might be cast in bronze in the shape of a stylized animal head, its surface incised with intricate patterns. Bells were not crude lumps of metal but finely tuned objects, often decorated with raised knobs or simple geometric designs. And while the wooden bodies of lyres have largely decayed, the solid gold or ivory tuning pegs and decorative appliques that have survived speak to their incredible opulence. These were instruments that were as beautiful to look at as they were to hear. Their value and artistry tell us that music itself was a high-status activity. To be a patron of music or even a performer was a mark of civilization and sophistication, setting the Thracian elite apart. Possessing such an instrument and the skill to play it was as much a symbol of power as owning a fine sword or a team of horses. But what did this funeral music actually sound like? While we can never hear it exactly, we can make educated guesses based on the instruments themselves and comparisons with neighboring cultures. The rhythm would have been driven by the relentless shake, shake, shake of the sistrum, creating a hypnotic, trance-like foundation. Over this, the clear, metallic ring of bells would have punctuated the air. If a lyre was present, its strings would have provided a melodic layer, likely based on simple modal scales similar to those used in ancient Greek music. The overall effect would have been haunting and powerful, not necessarily harmonious to our modern ears, but deeply spiritual and emotionally charged. It was music designed to alter consciousness, to ease the soul's transition from the world of the living into the realm of the divine. This sonic accompaniment transformed the funeral from a silent mourning into a vibrant, multi-sensory ritual, ensuring the deceased was sent off with a celebration that resonated through the very fabric of the cosmos. Yet beyond the solemn music and protective dogs, the Thracian funeral was also a stage for a more dynamic and enigmatic form of ritual. Scattered across their sacred art, from small bronze figurines to the faded pigments of tomb walls, we find evidence of performers whose role was to embody the supernatural itself. These were not ordinary mourners, they were masked dancers, individuals who transformed themselves through costume and movement into deities, spirits, or mythical beasts to act out sacred dramas for the benefit of the dead. Imagine the scene outside a freshly sealed tumulus, the flickering light of torches illuminating figures wearing grotesque, exaggerated masks carved from wood or molded from leather. Some might have the snarling face of a wolf or the serene head of a stag, while others could depict grinning, otherworldly human visages. Their movements would not have been a gentle procession but a vigorous, perhaps even ecstatic dance. A physical incantation meant to channel divine power directly into the funeral rite. The artifacts that hint at this practice are both fascinating and cryptic. Small bronze votive figurines have been discovered depicting humanoid figures with distinctly animal features, their bodies frozen in dynamic, twisting poses that suggest a ritual dance. More compellingly, frescoes within tombs like those at Kazanlak show processions of figures where some individuals appear to be wearing distinct headdresses or facial coverings that set them apart from the clearly human mourners. These are not the idealized portraits of gods we see in Greek art. They are more raw, more primal. A mask for the Thracians was far more than a disguise. It was a tool of transfiguration. By putting on the face of a wolf, a dancer was not just pretending to be the animal. They were believed to temporarily become the wolf, absorbing its cunning, strength, and connection to the wild. Similarly, a mask representing the god Dionysus would allow the performer to channel his chaotic, life-giving energy directly into the ceremony, blurring the line between the human and the divine for everyone present. The function of these ritual performances was likely twofold, operating on both a spiritual and a psychological level. On one hand, it was a powerful form of sympathetic magic. By reenacting key myths, perhaps the story of a dying and reborn god like Dionysus or Zagreus, the dancers were not merely telling a story. they were making it real in the sacred space around the tomb. Their performance became a cosmic template for the soul of the deceased to follow, a dramatic roadmap showing them how to navigate death and achieve rebirth just as the gods had done. The chaotic energy of the dance, the pounding rhythm, and the terrifying visages of the masks were all designed to tear a hole in the fabric of ordinary reality, creating a moment of pure potential where the soul's successful transition from one world to the next was not just hoped for but actively manifested. Simultaneously, for the living community, these rituals served as a vital form of communal catharsis. The death of a leader, especially a warrior chieftain, was a traumatic event that threatened the social and spiritual stability of the entire tribe. The raw, emotional intensity of a masked dance provided a sanctioned outlet for the collective grief, fear, and anxiety that such a loss provoked. It allowed the community to externalize these powerful emotions, to shriek and whirl and sweat them out under the safe guise of ritual possession. By the end of the performance, having witnessed the symbolic death and rebirth played out before them, the mourners could experience a sense of collective release and renewed hope. The ceremony transformed their personal sorrow into a shared, transcendent experience that reaffirmed the cyclical nature of life and death, ultimately strengthening the bonds of the community in the face of loss. Interpreting these ancient performances, however, presents a significant challenge because the Thracians left no written explanations of their own. We are left to piece together their meaning from silent art and comparisons with better documented neighboring cultures like the Greeks. Were the dancers members of a specific priestly class, or were they chosen ad hoc from the community? Were the performances carefully scripted, or were they spontaneous expressions of religious ecstasy? The precise answers are lost to time. What remains undeniable is the power of the imagery. The presence of these masked figures in a funerary context reveals a culture that understood death as a drama requiring a full cast, not just the deceased and their grave goods, but living actors willing to don a sacred mask and dance on the threshold between worlds, guiding the soul home through the sheer force of their embodied performance. Now let's turn our attention to the very instruments of power that defined a Thracian in life and were carefully chosen to accompany them into eternity, their weapons. Within the tomb, a sword laid beside its owner was far more than a simple piece of military equipment. It was an extension of the warrior's soul, a physical manifestation of their identity, honor, and social standing. The Thracians were renowned throughout the ancient world as fierce and skilled fighters, and their burial customs reflect a society where martial prowess was the primary avenue to prestige. To be buried without a weapon would have been unthinkable for a nobleman, akin to being sent on a perilous journey unarmed and unrecognized. But the types of weapons chosen and their condition tell a nuanced story that goes far beyond mere practicality, revealing a sophisticated language of symbolism etched in steel and bronze. We can broadly divide these grave goods into two distinct categories, each serving a different purpose. First, there are the actual battle-worn weapons. These are the swords with nicks on their blades, the spearheads with their tips slightly deformed from impact, the shields bearing the scars of deflected blows. These were the trusted companions of a lifetime of warfare, and their inclusion in the tomb was a powerful statement of the deceased's core identity. This was the weapon that had defended the tribe, secured plunder, and earned the warrior his reputation. Burying it with him was a way of saying that his identity as a fighter was non-negotiable, an essential part of his being that must continue in the afterlife. It affirmed that he would arrive in the next world not as a passive shade, but as the same formidable warrior he had always been, ready to serve his chieftain or the gods with the same valor. In stark contrast to these functional tools of war, we find a second category, ceremonial weapons of breathtaking opulence. These are objects of pure symbolism, crafted from solid gold or silver, and often so delicate or poorly balanced that they would have been useless in actual combat. Imagine a dagger with a blade of hammered gold, its hilt inlaid with intricate patterns of amber and coral, or a battle axe made of silver, its surface decorated with scenes of gods and griffins. These were not weapons for fighting, they were weapons for showing. Their presence signified immense wealth and a status so elevated that the individual's connection to the divine was more important than their practical role as a fighter. A golden sword was a symbol of kingship or high priesthood, suggesting the wearer derived their authority directly from the gods. It was a badge of office for the afterlife, a divinely sanctioned tool of command that transcended the need for mere physical combat. One of the most intriguing practices associated with these weapons, particularly the functional ones, is the ritual of killing them. Archaeologists have frequently uncovered swords that have been deliberately bent into a U shape or spearheads that have been snapped in two before being laid in the grave. To our modern sensibility, this seems like an act of vandalism, a disrespectful destruction of a valuable object, but for the Thracians it was a deeply meaningful and respectful act. They likely believed that objects like people possessed a spirit or a life force. A sword that had tasted battle had its own essence, its own history intertwined with its owner. By ritually killing the weapon, bending it, or breaking it, the community was freeing this spirit from its physical form. A functional sword would be useless to a spiritual being in the afterlife, but its essence, released through this symbolic act, could travel with the warrior's soul, becoming an eternal companion. It was the ultimate act of retirement, ensuring that the bond between warrior and weapon would never be broken. The specific choice of weapon itself can also be a clue to the deceased's specific role or even their tribal affiliation. A long, slashing sword or a rhomphaia, that fearsome Thracian weapon with a long, curved blade on a handle, was the hallmark of a frontline warrior, a nobleman who fought from a chariot or on foot in the thick of battle. This was a weapon of prestige and high status. A spear, on the other hand, was a more common weapon, but its inclusion could signify a different kind of warrior, perhaps a skilled infantryman or a hunter of renown. The discovery of a bow and arrows might point to someone who excelled at ranged combat, a specialist whose skills were highly valued. Furthermore, the decorative style of the weapon could act as a tribal fingerprint. The way a hilt was wrapped, the specific animal motifs engraved on a blade, or the shape of a spearhead could all indicate membership in a particular Thracian tribe, turning a personal possession into a marker of cultural identity that resonated far beyond the individual grave. But for all the weapons and wine prepared for the warrior's journey, there was one final, crucial obstacle that even the bravest soul could not overcome by force: the need to pay the toll. This brings us to a custom that reveals the Thracians were not isolated, but keenly aware of the spiritual ideas circulating in the ancient world. In many Thracian graves dating from the 5th century BCE onward, archaeologists have made a small but profoundly significant discovery: a single coin, often placed deliberately in the mouth of the deceased or clutched in their hand. This was not loose change accidentally dropped during the funeral. It was a carefully calculated payment for the most important voyage of all. Known famously as Charon's obol, this practice was a direct import from Greek mythology, showing how the Thracians selectively adopted and integrated foreign concepts that resonated with their own deep-seated beliefs about the afterlife. The myth behind the coin is one of the most enduring images from Greek lore. To reach the underworld, the shades of the dead had to cross a dark, forbidding river, most often called the Styx. The only way across was on the ferry piloted by Charon, a grim, shadowy figure who demanded payment for his services. Without a coin to offer him, a soul would be condemned to wander the misty shores for 100 years, lost and restless. The coin itself, an obol, was a small, low-denomination piece of bronze, the ancient equivalent of bus fare. For the Thracians, a people who believed in a tangible, geographic afterlife that required a journey, this concept made perfect sense. It plugged a potential gap in their spiritual logistics. They had equipped their dead with chariots for land and weapons for protection, but the Greek myth provided a solution for the aquatic leg of the trip. By adopting this practice, they were ensuring their loved ones lacked nothing, covering all possible travel expenses for the ultimate destination. What is truly fascinating, however, is not just the adoption but the adaptation. The Thracians did not simply copy the Greek custom, they made it their own. While they used the Greek concept of the ferryman, they often employed their own locally minted coins. Holding one of these coins today is like holding a tiny piece of Thracian history. They are typically small silver pieces, and their designs are a window into their world. One side might bear the image of a Thracian ruler, his name inscribed in Greek letters, a testament to the cultural interplay. The other side frequently showcases a powerful symbol of their own culture, a galloping horseman, a charging bull, or the head of their patron god, often identified with Dionysus or a local deity. This means the Thracian soul was not arriving at the riverbank with foreign currency. They were presenting a coin stamped with their own identity, their own symbols of power and faith. It was a subtle but powerful declaration that even while using a Greek concept, they were asserting who they were. For archaeologists, these coin burials are far more than just evidence of a belief. They are invaluable chronological anchors. Coins are one of the few artifacts that can be dated with remarkable precision. Unlike pottery styles that evolved gradually over decades, coins were minted by specific rulers, and their designs can often be pinned to a narrow time frame, sometimes to within a single decade or even a specific year. When a coin is found nestled in the jaw of a skeleton or resting in the palm of a hand, it provides a very reliable date for the entire burial. The other objects in the grave, the pottery, the weapons, the jewelry, can then be confidently dated to that same period. This turns each coin burial into a fixed point on a timeline, allowing researchers to build a precise chronology for an entire cemetery or region. It helps them track the evolution of Thracian art, technology, and funerary practices with an accuracy that would otherwise be impossible. The presence of charon's obol in Thracian tombs is a powerful reminder that ancient cultures were not static or closed off. It shows a people who are pragmatic and spiritually curious, willing to incorporate a useful idea from their neighbors to make their own complex belief system even more complete. They saw a potential problem in the soul's journey, the uncrossable river, and found an elegant solution that existed in the shared mythological landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean. This small, silent transaction, a single coin for a ferryman, speaks volumes about the interconnectedness of the ancient world and the universal human desire to leave nothing to chance when it comes to the fate of those we love. It was the final, essential piece of travel insurance, ensuring a smooth passage to whatever awaited on the far shore. But beyond the ferryman's toll and the protection of loyal hounds, the Thracians held a belief about the human body that might seem particularly striking to us, a profound fascination with the human head itself. We now encounter evidence of what scholars cautiously term a cult of the head, a set of rituals centered on the skull that reveals a belief in its unique and powerful essence. For the Thracians, the head was not merely another part of the body. It was considered the sacred container of a person's soul, their intellect, their life force, and their very identity. This conviction meant that the skull, as the durable, bony shell of this container, required its own specific and powerful rituals, both to honor the deceased and to potentially harness their power for the living. This special status is demonstrated by the discovery of skulls that were deliberately separated from their bodies and given their own distinct burials. In several archaeological sites, a single, carefully cleaned human skull has been found placed in a small pit or nestled within a ceramic vessel, often with a few grave goods like a simple pot or a piece of jewelry. This was not an act of desecration, but one of intense focus. By isolating the skull, the Thracians were effectively isolating and preserving what they believed was the most critical component of the person. It suggests a belief that while the body might return to the earth, The essence contained within the head needed a separate, dignified, and permanent home to ensure its continued peace or to maintain its protective influence over the community. This practice transforms the skull from a skeletal remain into a revered relic, an object of ancestral veneration. The theories behind this focus are as compelling as the finds themselves. The most prominent idea is that the head was seen as the literal seat of the soul, the command center from which consciousness, memory, and personality emanated. By preserving the skull, the community was safeguarding the very core of the individual's being. Another theory posits that the skull was a repository of power, especially if it belonged to a great leader, a mighty warrior, or a revered shaman. In this view, possessing the skull of such a figure was akin to possessing a battery of their accumulated authority and wisdom. The skull of a heroic chieftain might be buried at the boundary of a village to magically protect it, or kept within a chieftain's house to allow his descendants to draw upon his strength and guidance. It was a way of ensuring that the prowess of a great ancestor was never truly lost. Perhaps the most dramatic and physically arresting evidence of this cult comes from discoveries of skulls that were modified after death. There are documented cases of skulls that show signs of having been mounted on poles or displayed on wooden stakes. The telltale marks are often a hole carefully drilled through the cranium, typically at the back or the top, designed to accommodate a peg for public display. This practice might seem gruesome, but its purpose was likely multifaceted. Displaying the skull of a vanquished, powerful enemy could have been a stark warning and a trophy of victory. However, when applied to a respected member of the community, it could have had a completely different meaning. The displayed skull might serve as a powerful guardian totem, its sightless eyes watching over the living, its enduring presence a constant reminder of the ancestors' watchful spirit and the unbroken line of the tribe. This leads us to one of the most challenging aspects for archaeologists, distinguishing sacred veneration from the brutal realities of warfare. The Thracians were known as formidable warriors, and head hunting was a well-documented practice among many ancient warrior societies. Taking the head of a defeated enemy as a trophy was a way to claim their strength, humiliate their lineage, and prove one's own valor. So, when we find a solitary skull with a hole drilled for display, how can we tell if it was an honored ancestor or a despised foe? The context is everything. A skull found within a settlement, treated with care and buried with offerings, strongly suggests veneration. A skull found in a ditch near a battlefield, perhaps with other signs of trauma, is more likely a war trophy. But the line could sometimes blur. A particularly fearsome enemy's head might eventually be treated with a kind of respectful fear, its power harnessed over time through ritual, transforming a trophy into a protective talisman. The ultimate expression of the head's perceived power, however, involves a procedure performed on the living, trepanation. This is the ancient practice of drilling or scraping a hole into the skull, and evidence of it has been found on Thracian remains. Remarkably, many of these skulls show signs of healing, meaning the individual survived the operation. Why would someone undergo such a risky procedure? The reasons were likely deeply spiritual. It is theorized that trepanation was used to treat ailments that were believed to be caused by evil spirits trapped inside the head, perhaps severe migraines, epilepsy, or mental illness. By creating an opening, the shaman or healer was literally creating an escape route for the malevolent forces, releasing the pressure and restoring the person's spiritual balance. This practice underscores the fundamental belief that the head was a sacred but vulnerable vessel. What happened to the small round piece of bone removed during trepanation? We can only speculate that it may have itself become a powerful ritual object, a physical piece of a person's essence removed to cure them, and perhaps preserved as a sacred relic. The cult of the head, therefore, represents the Thracian belief in a concentrated life force, a power that resided in the skull, which demanded respect in death, offered protection to the living, and sometimes required a dramatic intervention to keep its sacred balance. After ensuring the soul was equipped with every conceivable tool for the afterlife, from golden passwords to loyal hounds, the Thracians sometimes chose a final resting place that was not built by human hands but carved by nature itself. We now venture away from the sunlit hills crowned with man-made tumuli and descend into the silent, shadowy depths of natural caves. For this civilization, a cave was far more than a simple shelter. It was a sacred portal, a direct gateway to the underworld and the domain of the chthonic deities, the powerful gods who ruled the earth's dark interior. To be buried in such a place was to skip the symbolic journey entirely. It was an immediate return to the womb of the earth, a profound act of reuniting the individual directly with the primordial forces of creation and destruction. The symbolism here is incredibly potent. Where a tumulus was an artificial mountain constructed to elevate the deceased towards the sky gods, a cave burial was an intentional descent, an embrace of the earth's deepest mysteries. The cave, with its dark, moist interior, stalactites hanging like stone icicles, and the constant, cool temperature, was a powerful natural analogue for the human concept of the underworld. By placing a body deep within this labyrinth, the Thracians were effectively delivering the soul straight to the doorstep of the gods below. This was not a journey that required a ferryman or a chariot. It was an instantaneous translocation. The cave was seen as a literal mouth of the earth, a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was at its thinnest and most permeable. This practice reflects a belief in a different kind of afterlife existence, one that was less about maintaining an aristocratic court and more about a mystical fusion with the raw, chthonic power of the planet itself. So, who was deemed worthy of such a direct and powerful burial? The evidence suggests that cave interments were not for everyone. Unlike the tumuli, which were clearly markers of secular, political power, cave burials seem to have been reserved for individuals with a special spiritual role. These were likely priests, priestesses, or shamans, people who served as intermediaries with the chthonic deities in life and were thus granted the honor of returning to their domain in death. They might have been initiates of specific mystery cults, perhaps related to a goddess of the earth or the underworld, for whom a cave was the most sanctified temple imaginable. In some cases, however, the use of caves might have been pragmatic or even carried a social stigma. They could have served as burial sites for outcasts, victims of plague, or those who died under ill-omened circumstances, whose spirits needed to be contained within the earth rather than allowed to wander. The very ambiguity makes these sites fascinating, as a single cave could have been both a sacred sanctuary and a place of exile, depending on the context. The grave goods found in these subterranean chambers are strikingly different from the opulent treasures of a royal tumulus. Instead of golden masks and ceremonial weapons, we find objects that speak to ritual and communion with the earth. Common finds include simple, handmade pottery, often blackened from use in fires, which may have held offerings of food or hallucinogenic substances for ritual consumption. There are often small, crude clay figurines, perhaps representing the chthonic deities themselves. A significant number of animal bones, particularly from goats or sheep, point to sacrifices made directly within the cave to appease the underworld gods. Perhaps the most telling artifacts are the remains of musical instruments like bone flutes and clay drums, whose echoing sounds in the cavernous space would have been used to contact the spirits of the deep. These were not goods for projecting power in a heavenly court, but tools for a shaman's eternal work, ensuring the individual could continue their sacred duties from within the very heart of the earth. The choice between a man-made tumulus and a natural cave ultimately signifies two divergent paths within Thracian spirituality. The tumulus was a statement of human order imposed upon the landscape, a celebration of earthly achievement meant to continue forever. It was about defying death by building a permanent monument. The cave burial, by contrast, was an act of submission to the natural world. It was an acknowledgement that humans are of the earth, and to the earth they must ultimately return in the most direct way possible. One path aspired to a heroic, individualized eternity among the gods. The other sought a mystical dissolution into the great, anonymous life force of the planet. This duality shows a civilization with a remarkably complex and layered understanding of death, capable of envisioning multiple, equally valid destinations for the human soul, each with its own unique landscape and spiritual requirements. And so, for centuries, the great Thracian tumuli stood silent upon the landscape, their original builders long since passed into legend, but the story of these earthen monuments was far from over. The 25th and final custom we explore is not one the Thracians themselves practiced, but one that unfolded over the millennia that followed: the remarkable legacy and continuous reuse of their burial mounds by the waves of cultures that succeeded them. These man-made mountains were such powerful features of the land that they could not be ignored. They became magnets for human activity, their meaning transforming with each new era, from sacred sites for the Romans to strategic strongholds for the Byzantines and spiritual centers for medieval Bulgarians. The tomb of a Thracian king, intended as a sealed eternal resting place, often became a multi-layered archive of Balkan history. When the Romans conquered Thrace, they encountered a landscape already dotted with these ancient grassy hills. Rather than demolishing them, the pragmatic Romans often saw their strategic value. A pre-existing mound already elevated provided a perfect foundation for a watchtower or a small fortification. It was a ready-made high point for monitoring roads and controlling the surrounding territory, but the Roman interaction went beyond mere practicality. They, too, held complex beliefs about the sacredness of certain places, and a site that had been venerated for centuries was often considered spiritually potent. Archaeologists have found evidence of Roman-era secondary burials inserted into the sides of older Thracian tumuli. A Roman soldier or official might be laid to rest in a simple pit dug into the mound slope, a practice that suggests a form of respect or a desire to associate the deceased with the perceived power and antiquity of the site. It was as if the Roman newcomers were tapping into the ancestral energy of the land, layering their own history onto the Thracian foundation. This pattern of reuse accelerated dramatically during the Byzantine Empire. As Christianity swept across the Balkans, the old pagan tombs presented a challenge and an opportunity for the new religious authorities. One of the most effective ways to Christianize a landscape was to literally build over its pagan past. What better symbol of the triumph of the new faith than to erect a Christian church directly on top of a pagan burial mound? The prominent location of the tumulus, often on a hill with commanding views, was ideal for a church, making it a visible beacon for the community. The spiritual significance of the site was not erased but co-opted. The power inherent in the place was redirected to serve the Christian God. Excavations on many tumuli have revealed the stone foundations of small chapels or churches from the Byzantine period, their altars standing directly above the sealed Thracian burial chambers far below. The continuity of the site as a sacred space was maintained, even as the nature of the divinity worshipped there was completely transformed. Later still, during the tumultuous medieval period when the First and Second Bulgarian empires rose and fell, the tumuli took on a new life as military assets. Their strategic value was rediscovered, and many were fortified with stone walls and palisades, becoming the cores of small, fortified settlements or lookout posts. The tomb of a Thracian chieftain became the citadel of a Bulgarian boyar. This continuous reuse presents a double-edged sword for modern archaeologists. On one hand, later activity inevitably disturbs the original Thracian context. A Byzantine church foundation might have cut through the top of the mound, scattering or destroying artifacts. A medieval fortress wall might have been built using stones looted from the original tomb chamber. Untangling the precise sequence of events, separating the Thracian layer from the Roman, Byzantine, and Bulgarian layers is a painstaking and complex puzzle. Yet, this very disturbance also tells a profound story. The accumulated layers of debris and construction are not just inconvenient clutter, they are a narrative of continuous human occupation and adaptation. A single mound can reveal fragments of Thracian pottery, a Roman coin, Byzantine roof tiles, and medieval weaponry, all within its soil. This makes the tumulus a unique historical document, a vertical timeline that captures over 2,000 years of human history in one location. The challenge for the archaeologist is to carefully dissect this timeline, but the reward is an unparalleled understanding of how one place can hold meaning for vastly different cultures across vast stretches of time. It shows that the Thracians, perhaps without intending to, created landmarks so enduring that they shaped the human geography of the Balkans for centuries to come. Today, these mounds stand as the most powerful and visible symbols of Thracian heritage. In countries like Bulgaria, they are protected national monuments, and the treasures unearthed from within them are the crown jewels of museum collections. The Valley of the Thracian Kings is a major tourist destination, where visitors can walk among these ancient hills and step inside reconstructed tombs to marvel at the frescoes. The legacy of the Thracians, once known only from the biased accounts of their Greek neighbors, has been reclaimed from the earth itself. The tumulus, in its long and varied life, embodies the entire Thracian story, a people of immense power and sophistication who were nearly forgotten, only to have their memory resurrected through the very monuments they built for eternity. They began as tombs for kings, became churches and fortresses for empires, and now endure as eternal reminders of a vibrant, complex, and truly fascinating civilization that mastered the art of the magnificent farewell. And so, as we emerge from the shadows of these ancient tombs, we are left with an overwhelming sense of the Thracian soul. Their burial customs were not a random collection of oddities, but a coherent and deeply spiritual system, a symphony of beliefs played out in gold, earth, and bone. From the colossal, man-made mountains built for warrior kings to the tiny, ochre-stained graves of infants tucked beneath family hearths, every practice was a brushstroke in a grand portrait of a people utterly consumed with the mystery of what lies beyond. They prepared for death with a creativity and devotion that is both alien and profoundly recognizable, revealing a civilization that celebrated life with such intensity that they invested everything in ensuring its quality would continue uninterrupted. When we step back and view these 25 customs as a whole, several defining characteristics of Thracian society come sharply into focus. First and foremost, we see a people with an exceptionally rich and complex spiritual life. Their worldview was not simple. It accommodated the ecstatic liberation promised by the Orphic mysteries on golden leaves, the martial order maintained by chariot burials, and the primal, earth-centric power of cave interments. They believed in a cosmos populated by gods who demanded libations, spirits who could be warded off with the jangle of bells, and a soul that required a detailed map and a coin for the ferryman. This was not a culture with a single, rigid dogma, but one that explored multiple pathways to the divine, each tailored to different needs and statuses. Secondly, these practices illuminate a society built on a rigid and unforgiving social hierarchy. The staggering difference between a chieftain buried with a retinue of servants and solid gold masks and a commoner laid to rest in a simple amphora speaks to a world where your status in life was your ticket to a specific kind of eternity. Power was not just for the here and now, it was a divine right that had to be projected into the next world to maintain the cosmic balance. Above all else, the unifying thread woven through every single one of these customs is the unwavering conviction that death was not an end. It was a transition, a journey, a magnificent beginning that required meticulous preparation. The Thracians did not see a corpse as an empty shell, they saw a traveler. And so they packed their bags for them with unimaginable care. They provided weapons for protection, wine for sustenance, chariots for mobility, and golden passwords for divine favor. They painted the walls with instructions, stationed loyal dogs as guides, and even ritually dismantled and reassembled the body itself to ensure a successful transformation. Every object, every ritual, every painted scene was a piece of a meticulously designed machine intended to launch the soul into a blessed and powerful afterlife. It leaves us with a haunting and beautiful question. In their extraordinary efforts to conquer death, what have the Thracians ultimately given us? They have given us a mirror. Their elaborate farewells force us to look at our own rituals, our own quiet fears and fervent hopes about mortality. While we may not build earthen mounds or lay golden masks over the faces of our loved ones, we too seek to honor them, to remember them, and to express our love in ways we hope will somehow bridge the great divide. The Thracians, in their magnificent and sometimes unsettling customs, show us the incredible lengths to which humanity will go to make sense of the ultimate mystery. They teach us that the drive to memorialize, to protect the soul, and to believe in something more is a force as enduring as the stone of their tombs. Now we turn this incredible journey over to you. After exploring these 25 unusual customs, from the grandeur of the tumulus to the intimacy of the child's burial, which one did you find the most fascinating, the most shocking, or the most moving? Was it the haunting idea of the masked dancers channeling the gods, or the practical yet profound payment of Charon's obol? Perhaps it was the loyal hounds standing guard for eternity, or the enigmatic practice of rearranging bones. We would love to hear your thoughts and continue this conversation down in the comments below. If you found this descent into the historical mysteries of the Thracians compelling, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are countless more lost civilizations and enigmatic secrets waiting to be uncovered, and we would be thrilled to have you join us.